As the Middle Ages progressed from the early to the high medieval period, the kingdoms and cultures which made up Great Britain gradually merged together, synthesized, and solidified into the recognizable realms and nations that survived to the modern day. In the north of the island, the two kingdoms which survived to rule the area were the Kingdom of England, which spread up from the far southern and eastern shores, and the Kingdom of Scotland, which dominated the far north. Where these two kingdoms and their peoples met and divided the land fluctuated greatly over time, with the border hardening over the Middle Ages into largely the recognizable one of the later eras, into the modern day. Before there was a Kingdom of England, the Anglo-Saxon tribes which had migrated to Great Britain from their Germanic homelands starting around the 5th century spread across the area which came to be known as England, eventually establishing a number of independent kingdoms. To the north of the River Humber, this was comprised of the separate kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira. After a period of back-and-forth overlordship and temporary conquest, the Bernician royal family united the two petty kingdoms in the 7th century into the mighty Kingdom of Northumbria, one of the foremost Anglo-Saxon realms of the early Middle Ages, and the preeminent one in the north. Above them lay several tribes united in loose confederations under high kings, namely the Gaels of the Kingdom of Dalriada in the Western Isles and Northern Ireland, the Britons of the Kingdom of Strathclyde around the area between the Solway and Clyde Firths, and the Picts within Pictland to the east. In this early period, the border between Northumbria and their northern neighbours cannot be described as clearly defined lines between states, but instead as a frontier zone of control emanating from royal centres of power, described by the historian David Rollison as rather being a graded continuum of control. Northumbria often enjoyed a hegemonic relationship with their northern neighbours during periods of the 7th and 8th centuries, able to extend their reach and influence west through Cumbria and up to the area north of the Solway Firth in the west and the Firth of Forth in the east. Despite setbacks like the crushing defeat of the Northumbrians by the Picts at the 685 Battle of Nectansmere, as well as wars to the south diluting their influence below the Humber, Northumbria managed to maintain and even grow its power in the north, extending their control up to the area around modern-day Ayr near the Firth of Clyde by the middle of the 8th century, with Northumbrian-style sculptures from the time period at Thornhill and Closeburn suggesting that this control extended inland as well. As with most aspects of Anglo-Saxon history, the situation was completely turned on its head with the arrival of the Vikings in the late 8th century, launching their infamous raid on the Northumbrian Abbey of Lindisfarne in the year 793. The kingdom was thrown into a perpetual state of chaos by the subsequent never-ending raids, which grew in size and scope before the invasion of England by the Great Heathen Army in 865, which sought to outright conquer the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Invading Northumbria in the following year, they made quick work of the centuries-old kingdom, with much of the kingdom around the power centre of York falling by the end of the year. The Northumbrian force, which had been divided in civil war between two rival kings prior to the invasion, rallied together, successfully storming the city before being slaughtered by the Viking defenders. While much of the kingdom was thus swept up in the ever-growing part of England controlled by the Vikings, known as the Danelaw, part of the kingdom north of the River Tees fought on, the English reeves of Bamberg surviving independently throughout the following decades, subjugating themselves to the kings of the new Kingdom of England while enjoying great amounts of autonomy during their periods of conquest over the Danelaw, while also holding out against the Danes during their sporadic resurgencies throughout the 10th century. While there are relatively sparse sources available to draw from, it is known that the non-English kingdoms to the north did not escape the wrath of the Northmen as well, whose role in their history would begin setting the stage for the future divisions of power in the region. The lands of Dalriada in the west were conquered by Vikings, who founded the Kingdom of the Isles. The Picts were defeated in battle by Vikings in the year 839, wiping out the ruling dynasty, which in turn caused a period of mass instability in the kingdom. Around the year 848, the king of the remaining lands of Dalriada, Kenneth, became ruler of the Picts. This dynastic union finally united the two kingdoms and their people, forming the Kingdom of Alba, which would eventually come to be known as the Kingdom of Scotland. The Britons of Strathclyde, meanwhile, managed to survive despite a Viking raid destroying the royal fortress at Dumbarton, though the event caused the kingdom to drift under the influence of Alba. The power vacuum caused by Northumbria's collapse appears to have allowed Strathclyde to move into Cumbria, either resettling the north or rejoining with British communities which had survived under 2 centuries of Northumbrian rule, extending their control into modern-day England. The English King Ethelstan managed to conquer the whole of the Danelaw in the early 10th century, and his unrivaled position in Great Britain forced the submission of the King of Alba and the ruler of Bamberg, who paid him homage in 927. This was evidently not enough for the English king, who launched an invasion into Scotland in 934, devastating the lands and position of the Scottish king Constantine, who was subsequently referred to as a mere sub-king in Ethelstan's charters after peace was agreed to, blurring the border of Scottish independence. This was met by vengeance from Alba and Strathclyde, which joined forces with the Viking king of Dublin in 937, ravaging into England. The subsequent Battle of Brunanburh ended with a rout of the anti-English forces, unable to undo the uniting of the English, with that task instead falling to the Danes alone for the rest of the century. King Edmund of England attacked Strathclyde in 945, which he granted to King Malcolm of Alba along with the Cumbrian lands. But they soon gained independence once more, highlighting the ebb and flow of the relationship between the two kingdoms of the north, rather than one of constant overlordship. The next major development in the Anglo-Scottish border came around the year 1018. The ruler of Bamberg met with the kings of Alba and Strathclyde at the Battle of Carham, which ended disastrously for the English ruler. Whether or not the battle itself caused the expansion of Alba, or it had happened 4 decades earlier due to a consolidation by England's King Edgar, all that is known is that the large swath of his domain between Berwick and Lothian subsequently fell under the control of Alba, allowing for the famous border in the east to begin to take shape along the River Tweed. Strathclyde itself was soon after annexed into Alba, creating the United Kingdom of Scotland. The English King Ethelred had invaded Cumbria in the year 1000, but this invasion failed to secure Cumbria from the Scots. The invasion of the powerful Earl Siward sometime around the 1040s proved more successful, securing all of Cumbria during his life for England. Following his death, however, King Malcolm III of Scotland invaded the area once more, seizing Cumberland in the north around 1061, which was the state of the border by the Norman Conquest of England in 1066, which they maintained during the rule of King William the Conqueror due to his troubles in securing the north. And during his reign, Malcolm launched several raids into England. Malcolm pushed his luck too far during the reign of King William II, launching an invasion likely in an attempt to push the border to the River Tees. William responded with an invasion of his own, and all of Cumbria was finally wrested from Scottish control with the construction of a castle at Carlisle, successfully cementing the border. With this, the general area of the border, which survived throughout the later Middle Ages and beyond, was finally established. The exact border fluctuated over time throughout the countless raids and wars waged between the two kingdoms, with the period of hegemony fought for by King Edward I and his successors around the early 14th century extending English claims far into the Scottish lowlands. But this state of affairs failed to unseat the traditional border area which had split the two cultures in the early Middle Ages. The widespread conquest of the early frontier zones hardening into small successful changes beyond raids within the Scottish marches in later periods, fostering a land of relative lawlessness in the areas surrounding the border, which came to be known as the Debatable Lands, which were dominated by a group of thieves with no allegiance to either group, known as the Reeves. Despite this, the notion of a border around the area between Cumberland and the River Tweed endured, with it still marking the border between England and Scotland in the present day, even after hundreds of years of personal union of the two nations into one kingdom. Thank you to Tanya Dennis for joining on Patreon.